The click was a ghost of a sound, a faint metallic snap so soft it was immediately consumed by the dense, humid air of the Sfax night. For Mohammed al-Zawahiri, starting the engine of his Peugeot 308, it was nothing. For the city, it was less than nothing. But for Ariel, coiled in the deep shadows between a rust-eaten commercial dumpster and a wall shedding paint like sunburnt skin, it was as loud and definitive as a chambered round. His fingers, covered in a thin film of sweat despite the cooling night, released the small gray puck of plastic and metal. The act was complete. The M17 magnetic GPS tracker, a device no larger than a stack of 5 one-dinar coins, was now anchored to the undercarriage of the Peugeot, nestled in the specific cavity just behind the front left wheel well. This placement was not arbitrary. It was the result of weeks of analysis by Mossad's technical division, Q branch. They had determined this precise spot offered the optimal balance of signal transmission strength, protection from road debris, and minimal chance of discovery during routine maintenance. Ariel had practiced the placement 112 times on an identical 308 in a climate-controlled warehouse deep in the Negev desert. His movements were a piece of brutalist ballet, a sequence of muscle memory designed for absolute efficiency. 16 seconds, from the moment his hand broke the plane of shadow to the moment he was back in cover. His record was 12. Tonight, under operational conditions, it had taken him 27. A lifetime. A single bead of sweat detached from his temple, tracing a cold path down his cheek. He did not move. He did not wipe it away. He began the breathing exercises drilled into him at the academy, the 4-count box. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. His heart rate, which had spiked to 140 beats per minute, began its slow, forced descent. He was no longer a man. He was a patch of darkness, a piece of the urban geometry, indistinguishable from the filth and decay of the alley. From atop the dumpster, a stray cat with one milky eye hissed, its own nocturnal hunt momentarily disturbed. Far down the narrow, poorly lit street, a pair of halogen headlights cut through the haze. They weren't moving with purpose. They were crawling, sweeping the street in a lazy, methodical arc. Ariel's blood, which he had just coaxed into a state of calm, turned to ice. He knew the patrol schedules for this district. He had memorized them. The local police car wasn't due for another 45 minutes. This was an unscheduled patrol, a random sweep, perhaps triggered by a call about a domestic dispute 2 streets over. It was the worst kind of variable, pure, unadulterated chance. His mind, a finely tuned instrument for threat assessment, processed his options with cold speed. Option 1, remain static, press himself into the alcove, making himself as thin as possible. Rely on the depth of the shadows and the patrol's indifference. A 50% chance of success at best. The human eye is drawn to patterns, and his silhouette, however obscured, was a disruption in the alley's pattern. Option 2, flee, a guaranteed mission failure. The sound of his footsteps on loose gravel would trigger immediate pursuit. He was a foreigner in a residential neighborhood after midnight. His cover as a Belgian ornithologist, meticulously constructed over weeks, would evaporate under the first aggressive question from a bored Tunisian cop. His accent, his clothes, his very presence would be incriminating. Option 3, the brazen deception. Step out into the periphery of the light, turn his back, and pretend to be urinating against the wall. A plausible, if disgusting, reason for his presence. It created a narrative. But it was also risky, It invited interaction, questioning. It relied on the officer's desire to avoid a distasteful encounter. The headlights were closer now, the low grumble of the Peugeot's diesel engine echoing between the concrete buildings. He had less than 5 seconds to commit. The voice of his handler, a memory from a sterile, soundproofed briefing room in Tel Aviv, surfaced in his mind. It wasn't a piece of advice. It was a statement of doctrine. When the plan fails, the principle remains. Become the unexpected variable. Control the narrative. He chose option 4. As the police car crawled to within 20 meters, Ariel stepped out of the darkness. He did not move away from the target vehicle. He moved towards it. He pulled a cheap, tourist-grade digital camera from his jacket pocket. He raised it, aimed it at the Peugeot 308, and snapped a photo. The onboard flashed deliberately and blindingly bright. The effect was instantaneous. The police car screeched to a halt, its tires protesting on the asphalt. 2 uniformed officers, startled from their late-night torpor, burst out of the car, their expressions a mixture of confusion and anger. One had his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. Before they could speak, Ariel launched his offensive. He unleashed a frantic tirade in broken, heavily accented French, a performance he had rehearsed for just such a contingency. Cette voiture, cet homme, il a frappé ma location, là-bas. He gesticulated wildly with the camera, pointing back down the street from where the Peugeot had come. Il est parti, sans un mot. He was no longer a covert operative. He was an indignant, slightly drunk Belgian tourist, the unexpected variable. The cologne he had applied 2 hours earlier, a cheap and overpowering scent purchased from a street vendor, now served its purpose, completing the olfactory dimension of his cover. The officers were thrown off balance. Their training was for criminals and suspects, not for hysterical foreigners complaining about traffic incidents. They exchanged a look of profound annoyance. This was paperwork. This was a headache. They shone a flashlight on the rear bumper of the Peugeot. It was pristine. They looked back at Ariel, who was now theatrically examining his camera's display as if it held the evidence of a capital crime. After a full minute of Ariel's increasingly frustrated pantomime and their perfunctory questions, they made a command decision. They told him to file a report at the central station in the morning and got back in their car, shaking their heads at the antics of tourists. They drove off. Ariel watched the red taillights disappear. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. The performance had cost him, flooding his system with adrenaline. He waited. He counted a full 10 minutes, a period of agonizing stillness, before he allowed himself to detach from the wall and melt back into the deeper shadows of the alleyway, taking a circuitous route back to his rented flat. The mission was complete. The tracker was live. The engineer was tagged. Miles away, in a subterranean, sound-deafened signals intelligence facility in Tel Aviv known only as the Pit, a single green dot began to blink on a high-resolution satellite map of the Tunisian coast. The hunt had officially begun. The operation, codenamed Cerberus, was not a preemptive strike. It was a reaction, born from the ashes of a catastrophic intelligence failure and the slow, dawning horror that Israel's technological and military dominance was being fundamentally challenged from an axis no one had predicted: the sea. The foundational briefing was delivered by a man known only as Tamar to the 3 field operatives cleared for the mission. Tamar was not an operator. He was a data analyst from Unit 8200, the IDF's Signal Intelligence Corps. He was a prodigy, a man who saw coherent narratives in the chaotic static of global data streams. His legend within the unit was cemented when he pinpointed the exact location of a Syrian chemical weapons cache, not through a single informant, but by triangulating three disparate, seemingly innocuous data points. A 300% spike in electricity consumption in a remote desert quadrant. A purchase order for 2,000 meters of corrosion-resistant ceramic piping from a German front company. And the geotagged social media posts of a disgruntled supply sergeant's girlfriend complaining about the terrible food at her boyfriend's secret desert base. Tamar saw the patterns others dismissed as noise. He was the one who had first identified the ghost in the machine. The core team assembled for Cerberus was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Small, specialized, and lethally effective. The leader was Yael, the Pathfinder, a 20-year veteran of the Caesarea Division, Mossad's operational arm. Her defining achievement was the 2012 exfiltration of a high-value Iranian nuclear physicist from the heart of Tehran. She hadn't used a single bullet. She had used logistics as a weapon. She constructed a flawless 6-week cover story that saw the scientist attend a real medical conference in Istanbul, travel on a forged Swiss passport that was biometrically perfect, and board a commercial flight to Zurich that was delayed for 90 minutes due to a mechanical issue. A software glitch introduced into the airline's maintenance system by a Unit 8200 cyber warfare team, timed to the exact second needed for her asset to clear security and board. Yael's mind was a machine for solving impossible, multi-layered logistical puzzles. Then there was Ariel, the ghost. His specialty was close target reconnaissance and infiltration. He had once spent 6 months living in the Dahieh, the Hezbollah-controlled southern suburb of Beirut, mapping their tunnel network. He hadn't used ground-penetrating radar, which was too detectable. He had posed as a French civil engineer studying urban subsidence, and over months, he measured the minute seismic vibrations caused by passing traffic, using the data to create a detailed 3D map of the voids beneath the streets. He could adopt the mannerisms, accent, posture, and even the ambient emotional state of his cover identity so perfectly that he ceased to be a foreign presence. He became invisible. The final member of the field team was David, the Sentinel. His Mossad file was remarkably thin, most of it redacted into black bars. Ex-Sayeret Matkal, the IDF's premier special forces unit. His most public achievement was a negative one, a bus bombing in Jerusalem that never happened. Intelligence had pointed to an imminent attack, but the bomber's identity and location were unknown. For 72 consecutive hours, David lived on the city's bus network, riding every major line, his gaze sweeping over every passenger, every unattended bag, every nervous tick. He identified the suspect not through a tip, but through rigorous behavioral analysis. The way the man avoided eye contact with security personnel, the subtle bulge of the vest under his loose-fitting jacket, the beads of sweat on his upper lip in an air-conditioned bus. David neutralized him at a bus stop on Jaffa Road, a single block from his intended target, the Mahane Yehuda Market. David was the operation's kinetic element, the specialist in controlled, precise violence. These 3 agents, guided by Tamar's remote analysis, were tasked with solving the problem of Mohammed al-Zawahiri. The chessboard they were operating on was more complex than ever. The 2014 Gaza conflict, Operation Protective Edge, had been a brutal, asymmetric war. Israel's Iron Dome system had proven its worth, a technological marvel that neutralized over 90% of the thousands of crude Qassam and Grad rockets fired by Hamas. But Hamas leadership understood they could not win a symmetrical fight. They needed a new weapon, a new vector of attack that bypassed the dome entirely. The first clue emerged in March 2015. An Israeli Navy Dvora-class patrol boat, on a routine sweep off the Gaza coast, intercepted a garbled radio transmission. It was low frequency, heavily encrypted using a non-standard algorithm, and lasted only 2.7 seconds. Unit 8200's cryptographers and linguists couldn't make sense of it. But Tamar's pattern recognition algorithms flagged its structure. It wasn't human communication. It was a data burst, a telemetry stream, a test. 2 months later, an Israeli fishing trawler operating in international waters, 20 nautical miles from Ashdod, reported a strange sighting. A small, unmanned submersible vehicle, approximately 2 meters in length, breaking the surface for a moment before silently disappearing. The report was filed with the Navy and forgotten by everyone except Tamar. He cross-referenced the date, time, and coordinates of the sighting with the telemetry intercept. It was a direct match. Something was being tested in the deep waters off the Israeli coast. The mission genesis crystallized in January 2016. A Shin Bet raid on a Hamas safe house in Hebron yielded a surprising trove. Alongside the expected weapons and cash, they found a laptop belonging to a mid-level Hamas commander. Most of the data was protected by military-grade encryption, but a single folder had been carelessly left on the desktop. It contained fragmented engineering schematics created with a commercial CAD software. They weren't for rockets. They showed a small, propeller-driven vehicle with a hollow payload compartment and what appeared to be a sophisticated guidance system based on a commercial-grade GPS and an inertial navigation unit. And embedded in the metadata of one of the files, a single, recurring code name: Al-Mohandis, the engineer. Tamar's team at Unit 8200 worked for weeks, cross-referencing that codename against every intelligence database at their disposal: SIGINT, HUMINT, FININT. They searched flight manifests, academic publications, patent filings, and dark web forums. Nothing. The engineer was a ghost. The breakthrough came from a Mossad Katsa, field officer, cultivating a source inside a Turkish university known for its advanced engineering program and its quiet sympathy for the Muslim Brotherhood. The source mentioned a brilliant Tunisian aviation engineer, a former pilot for Tunisia, who had abruptly left a lucrative career to pursue freelance aerospace consulting. He had published several obscure papers in niche journals on UAV stabilization and remote guidance systems. His name was Mohammed al-Zawahiri. Suddenly, the disparate pieces snapped into a terrifyingly coherent picture. Zawahiri was an active member of the Muslim Brotherhood in Tunisia. Financial intelligence showed he had recently traveled to both Turkey and Lebanon. His specific area of academic expertise, unmanned vehicle guidance systems, was a perfect match for the fragmented schematics. He lived a quiet, unassuming life in Sfax, Tunisia, a country friendly to the West, but whose internal security services, the DSE, were overwhelmed with post-revolutionary turmoil and the growing threat of ISIS on their Libyan border. Tunisia was the perfect gray zone for a deniable black operation. Tamar dug deeper, tasking an Eros satellite to focus on Zawahiri's address. The imagery showed a large, detached workshop in the back of his property. Thermal imaging overlays, taken at different times of day and night, showed it was in constant use, particularly late at night, generating significant heat signatures consistent with light manufacturing and electronics work. A financial analysis team traced a series of structured cash payments into Zawahiri's wife's bank account. The payments, always just under the $10,000 reporting threshold, originated from a charitable organization in Beirut that was a known and documented front for Hamas's finance wing. The threat was no longer theoretical. It was clear, present, and existential. Zawahiri wasn't just designing hobby drones. He was building a weapon that could fundamentally alter the strategic balance in the Eastern Mediterranean. He was designing and building prototypes for a fleet of unmanned underwater vehicles, naval drones. They could be launched from the coast of Gaza, travel submerged and undetected beneath the shipping lanes, and detonate with explosive force against Israel's multi-billion-dollar natural gas platforms, the economic lifeblood of the country. They could target Israeli Navy vessels in Haifa's port or, in a nightmare scenario, detonate against crowded civilian beaches in Tel Aviv. They were suicide submarines, the naval equivalent of the IED. They were a threat the Iron Dome couldn't see and the Israeli Navy couldn't easily stop. Mohammed al-Zawahiri, the engineer, had been designated a high-priority threat. But killing him wasn't enough. It would set the program back, but the knowledge would survive. They needed his research, his designs, his contact lists, his entire network. The mission had two objectives, in order of priority. First, capture all of his data. Second, eliminate the asset. Operation Cerberus was greenlit by direct order of the Prime Minister. The plan in motion began not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a Brussels Airlines Airbus A320 descending into Tunis Carthage International Airport. Yael entered Tunisia first, 2 full months before the designated operational window. Her Belgian passport identified her as Dr. Elise Moreau, a sociologist from the University of Ghent with a grant to research post-Arab Spring youth movements. Her cover was a masterpiece of depth and banality. She had a functioning university email address, a moderately viewed academic blog, a published and intentionally bland paper on Tunisian youth unemployment, and a pre-arranged schedule of meetings with real Tunisian academics and NGO leaders, none of whom had any idea of her true purpose. She spent weeks establishing a legitimate, verifiable footprint, building a life that could withstand anything up to a full-scale DSE investigation. She rented a modest second-floor apartment on Rue de Bizerte in Sfax. It was a busy, noisy street, but the apartment's living room window offered a clear, unobstructed line of sight to the front of Mohammed al-Zawahiri's home, 410 meters away. One of her first actions was to complain to the landlord about the incessant traffic noise, a deliberate act to justify the heavy, light-blocking curtains she immediately installed, behind which she would spend countless hours. Ariel arrived 3 weeks later, flying into Gerba on a charter flight from Rome. His cover was Marco Bianchi, a freelance photojournalist working on a feature for an Italian travel magazine about Tunisia's ancient olive groves. This provided the perfect, logical reason for him to travel extensively around the Sfax region, carry a backpack full of cameras with powerful telephoto lenses, and spend hours in one location without arousing suspicion. He never made direct contact with Yael. They existed in parallel universes, their only communication a series of encrypted, single-use text messages relayed through a dead-drop server in Estonia. David was the last to arrive, just 10 days before the target date. He came by overnight ferry from Palermo, Sicily, traveling as a French businessman named Luc Fournier, exploring opportunities to import Tunisian olive oil for a mid-sized European distributor. His cover was the thinnest, designed only for short-term use. He checked into a Novotel, and his primary task was logistics, procuring 2 clean, untraceable cars and mapping primary, secondary, and tertiary exfiltration routes out of the city and the country. The apartment on Rue de Bizerte became the operation's nerve center. It was Spartan. A mattress on the floor, a folding table, a chair, and a black Pelican case Yael had brought in her checked luggage. The case's contents were the heart of the surveillance operation. The primary tool was a multispectral imaging scope, a piece of technology that did not officially exist. To the naked eye, it looked like a high-end telephoto camera lens. But connected to a ruggedized laptop, it could see in thermal, near-infrared, and standard optical light, layering the images to create a composite, data-rich view. Yael could sit in her darkened window and not only watch Zawahiri's house, but also count the number of people in each room by their heat signatures through the walls. She could tell when he was working in his workshop by the precise heat bloom from the specific machinery he was using. This was the foundation of their pattern-of-life analysis. Their communication with Tamar in Tel Aviv was handled by a device called the Sparrow. It was a burst transmission radio the size of a deck of cards. It compressed hours of surveillance data, images, logs, audio files, into a 2-second squirt of encrypted code, which was then bounced off a commercial Iridium satellite. The transmission was almost impossible to intercept, and even if it was, it would be dismissed by any listening post as meaningless background static. For close-in intelligence gathering, Ariel used a glowworm audio device. It was cosmetically identical to a standard European power adapter. He plugged it into an outlet in a cafe, where Zawahiri was known to meet his contacts. It contained a highly sensitive microphone and a small solid-state memory buffer. It silently recorded all ambient sound, and when Ariel walked past the cafe later that day, the device would transmit the stored audio to a receiver in his phone via a low-power, encrypted Bluetooth signal. Technology was the enabler, but its limitations created constant tension. The multispectral scope's custom battery lasted only 4 hours per charge, forcing Yael to be ruthlessly efficient with her observation windows. The Sparrow's burst transmissions could only be sent twice a day, at prearranged, algorithmically determined times, meaning their intelligence was always hours old when it reached Tel Aviv. The glowworm's transmission range was a mere 10 meters, forcing Ariel into nerve-wracking proximity to his targets simply to retrieve the data he had already risked so much to collect. Weeks were spent weaving a complete tapestry of the engineer's life. He woke at 6 a.m., prayed at the Al-Khamsa Mosque at 6:30, drove his children to their private school at 7:45, taught mechanical engineering at the National School of Engineers of Sfax from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. He returned home, ate dinner with his family, and then, at precisely 8 p.m. every night, he would walk to the workshop in his backyard and work, often until 2 or 3 a.m. They documented his every move, his every habit. They knew he bought Marlboro Reds from the same corner store every 2 days. They knew he had a mistress, another university professor, whom he met on Thursday afternoons in a rented apartment across town. Every detail was a potential vulnerability, a piece of the operational puzzle. The first major setback occurred 3 weeks into the deep surveillance phase. Ariel had successfully placed the GPS tracker on Zawahiri's Peugeot, and they were now building a complete 24/7 map of his movements. Tamar, back in Tel Aviv, noticed an anomaly in the data stream. Every time Zawahiri's vehicle drove past the heavily guarded headquarters of the Tunisian Ministry of Interior on Avenue Habib Bourguiba, a secondary, unknown signal would ping the tracker. It was a faint, passive signal, the distinct electronic signature of a wide-net surveillance system used for tracking tagged vehicles of interest. Tamar's analysis was swift and chilling. The Tunisian Domestic Intelligence Service, the DSE, was also monitoring Zawahiri. The Mossad team had unknowingly walked into a crowded, contested operational theater. This changed everything. They weren't just avoiding Zawahiri's suspicion. They were now actively hiding from a state-level intelligence agency on its own home turf. Yael immediately implemented new, more stringent protocols. All visual surveillance was to be conducted from inside the apartment, with no exceptions. Ariel's photojournalist trips were curtailed to only the most essential excursions. David was instructed to swap his rental car for a new one every 48 hours. A logistical nightmare. The tension in the Rue de Bizerte apartment became a physical presence. Every creak of the floorboards, every unexpected knock on a neighbor's door, was a potential compromise. Then came the second, more dangerous setback. David had procured the 2 vehicles for the final, kinetic phase of the operation. A white Renault traffic van to be used as a block car, and a gray Hyundai i20 as the primary getaway vehicle. He purchased them with cash from a used car dealer known for his flexible attitude towards paperwork. 2 days before the planned strike, David was performing a final systems check on the vehicles, parked on different levels of a multi-story garage near the port. As he approached the Hyundai, his training screamed at him. A small piece of trash, a brightly colored candy wrapper, had been tucked under the windshield wiper. It hadn't been there the day before. He didn't touch the car. He walked past it as if heading for another vehicle, went up a flight of stairs, and established an observation point. 20 minutes later, 2 men in plain clothes and cheap leather jackets approached the car, glanced at the candy wrapper, made a brief call on a mobile phone, and walked away. It was a marker, a signal. The DSE had found the car. It was either a random discovery or, far worse, they were actively tracking the team. Yael had to make a call. Abort the mission or escalate. To abort now would mean months of work and millions of dollars would be wasted. And a critical national security threat would be left to fester, now likely alerted to foreign interest. To continue meant improvising a new plan in the final 48 hours. With a hostile, competent intelligence service actively hunting them. Yael, true to her reputation as the Pathfinder, chose to escalate. She made a single burst transmission to Tamar. Her message was 5 words. Compromised. Need a southern storm. The request was audacious. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding that Mossad create a geopolitical incident to save her operation. Tamar understood immediately. Within hours, an anonymous tip was fed to the French intelligence service, the DGSE, from a highly reliable long-term Mossad source inside Libya. The tip claimed that a terrorist cell, responsible for a recent attack on French tourists in the Sahel, was hiding out in the southern Tunisian city of Tataouine. The information was specific, credible, detailed, and completely false. But it was enough. The Tunisian government, under intense pressure from Paris, was forced to divert massive DSE and military resources to the south of the country to conduct a highly visible and ultimately fruitless manhunt. The DSE's attention was pulled away from Sfax. Yael had bought her team a 72-hour window, but they still needed new cars. David was tasked with the highest-risk move of the operation so far, stealing 2 vehicles, not hot-wiring them in the street, but executing a clean theft. Through a cutout, he hired a local petty criminal to steal 2 specific models of cars, another Hyundai and another Renault, from the long-term parking lot at Sfax Thaina International Airport. The theft would be reported, but likely not for days, long after the team was gone. The new cars were delivered to a new, pre-vetted location. The plan was back on track, but the margin for error was now 0. The DSE's temporary distraction wouldn't last forever. They had one shot. The kill box was a specific intersection on Zawahiri's route home from the university. He passed through it every day at approximately 4:10 p.m. A traffic light at the intersection was notoriously slow, creating a predictable 90-second stop. This was the designated stage. The plan was a symphony of precise, interlocking movements. David would be driving the Renault van. He would get ahead of Zawahiri's Peugeot and break down just past the intersection, blocking the road. A second team, hired locally and completely compartmentalized, 2 Bosnian war veterans with Belgian passports who had been brought in just for this part of the operation and knew nothing of the wider context, would be in the Hyundai. They would pull up behind Zawahiri, boxing him in. Ariel, along with one of the Bosnians, would be the shooters. They would approach the car on foot from 2 different directions, posing as pedestrians. The weapons were 2 Beretta 70 pistols, chambered in .22 LR, fitted with state-of-the-art suppressors. The classic Mossad assassination tool. Quiet, reliable, clinical. Yael would be the eye in the sky, the conductor of the orchestra, positioned in a rented room overlooking the intersection, coordinating every movement via encrypted bone conduction earpieces. The final, critical piece of the plan was the one no one but Yael and Tamar knew about. The assassination was not the primary objective. It was the diversion. While the world's attention was focused on the shooters and the dead driver, the second Bosnian operative had a different, more important job. His task was to open the front passenger door of Zawahiri's car, which would be unlocked remotely by a device Yael controlled. Grab the leather laptop bag Zawahiri always kept on the seat next to him, and disappear into the crowd. The real target was the data. The elimination of the engineer was just the means to an end. The final 24 hours were a study in controlled tension. All external communication was cut. Each member of the team reviewed their specific role in silence, visualizing the sequence of events, the flow chart of actions and reactions. There was no room for sentiment, no time for doubt. There was only the mission clock. December 15th, 2016. Sfax went about its business, oblivious. The sky was a hazy, washed-out gray. The air was thick with the smell of diesel exhaust and grilled fish from the port. 15:30. Yael, dressed as a conservative local woman in a hijab and long coat, enters the rented room overlooking the target intersection. She runs a final check on the comms link. The connection is clear, with no interference. She scans the street below with binoculars. No unusual activity. No sign of the DSE. The French diversion in Tatooine is holding. 15:45. David, driving the white Renault traffic van, enters the traffic pattern 3 kilometers north of the kill box. He drives slowly, meticulously obeying every traffic law, becoming just another anonymous commercial vehicle in the afternoon rush. 15:55. The 2 Bosnian operatives, one of whom is Ariel in disguise, park the gray Hyundai on a side street, 200 meters from the intersection. They exit the vehicle and separate, melting into the light pedestrian traffic. One heads north of the intersection, one south. They are now just 2 men waiting to cross a busy street. 16:02. Tamar's voice, calm and digitized, comes through Yael's earpiece. Assad is mobile. He has left the university parking lot, on schedule. 16:08. Yael spots the target. Zawahiri's silver Peugeot 308 turns onto the main thoroughfare, 4 blocks away. Visual confirmation, she whispers into her concealed microphone. Assad is approaching. All teams, final confirmation. One by one, their voices come back, clipped and professional. Sentinel in position. Ghost in position. Hammer in position. Anvil in position. The local hires had their own code names. 1609. David, in the Renault, sees the silver Peugeot in his rearview mirror. He times his approach perfectly. As the traffic light ahead turns yellow, he accelerates gently, then brakes smoothly, positioning himself to be the first car stopped at the red light. 16:10:05. The light turns red. David stops the Renault. Zawahri's Peugeot pulls up directly behind him. The gray Hyundai, driven by the second Bosnian, pulls up behind the Peugeot, leaving no room for escape. The box is closed. The target is trapped. 16:10:15. Box is set, Yael says, her voice flat. Go. David turns the ignition key on his van. It sputters and dies. He tries again. Nothing. He puts on his hazard lights. A classic, believable breakdown. 16:10:22. The two shooters, Ariel and the Bosnian codenamed Hammer, begin their approach. They do not run. They walk at a normal urban pace, converging on the driver's side of the Peugeot from the front and rear. They are invisible, just two men in a crowd. Zawahri is distracted, looking at the broken-down van, his face a mask of annoyance at the delay. 16:10:31. Yael presses a button on a small, nondescript device in her hand. A focused radio frequency signal targets the Peugeot's specific electronic locking system. The car's doors unlock with an audible click that Zawahri doesn't hear over the city noise. 16:10:35. The third operative, Anvil, moves from his position near a newsstand on the passenger side of the street. His timing is linked to the shooter's final steps. 16:10:40. Ariel reaches the driver's side window. Zawahri, sensing movement in his periphery, turns his head. There is a flicker of surprise in his eyes, a dawning recognition that this is not a random event. It is too late. Ariel raises the suppressed Beretta. The sound is a series of soft, wet coughs, a pift, pift, pift that is completely lost in the hum of traffic and idling engines. 3 rounds of .22 LR ammunition in a tight, 3-inch grouping on the window, striking Zawahri in the head and neck. Hammer, at the rear passenger window, fires 2 more rounds as a contingency, ensuring the target is neutralized. 16:10:42. Simultaneously, Anvil opens the front passenger door. He does not look at the driver. His focus is singular. He reaches in, his hand grabbing the worn leather strap of the black laptop bag, and closes the door. The entire action takes less than 2 seconds. 16:10:45. The shooters turn and walk away in opposite directions. They do not run. They blend back into the crowd of pedestrians. Anvil, with the laptop bag now concealed inside a larger grocery bag he was carrying, walks calmly down a side street. 16:11. Horns begin to honk. Drivers behind the Hyundai are getting impatient. A pedestrian, waiting to cross, finally notices the strange stillness of the driver in the Peugeot. The spiderweb cracks in the driver's side window. A woman screams. 16:11:30. David, his job done, miraculously, gets the van to start. He pulls away slowly, turning down the first side street and out of sight. The gray Hyundai pulls out and drives away in the opposite direction. 16:12 Wooer. All assets are clear of the kill box. Yael reports into her microphone. Phase 1 complete. Proceed to extraction. She packs her small bag containing her optics and comms device, walks out of the room, locks the door behind her, and disappears into the chaos she has just orchestrated. The entire operation, from the moment the box was closed to the moment the last asset was clear, took less than 2 minutes. The immediate fallout was precisely what Mossad's Strategic Planning Division had predicted. The Sfax police were slow to respond, and by the time they established a perimeter, the scene was hopelessly contaminated. The official narrative, pushed by Tunisian authorities eager to avoid any hint of terrorism, quickly became one of a business deal gone wrong or a possible criminal hit. It was clean. No shell casings were recovered immediately. The .22 LR rounds were small, and the shooters had been meticulous. The abandoned Renault van and Hyundai sedan were found hours later in different parts of the city, wiped clean of all fingerprints, DNA, and forensic evidence. The Tunisian authorities were baffled. They released grainy CCTV footage of two men walking away from the scene, but their faces were obscured and their clothing was generic. It was a complete dead end. Within 24 hours, Hamas's Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades issued a statement from Gaza. They claimed Mohammed al-Zawahiri as one of their own, a hero of the Palestinian resistance and a pioneer in their drone program. They explicitly blamed Mossad for the cowardly Zionist assassination. Iran's state media echoed the accusation. The international press picked up the story. Israel, following its long-standing policy of deliberate ambiguity, issued no comment. The silence was its own form of confirmation. The extraction was the final, perilous act of the ballet. The Bosnian operatives were out first. They drove east, to the port of Zarzis, where a small fishing boat was waiting to take them on a rough, 12-hour journey to Malta. They were paid, debriefed by a Katsa, and sent on their way, never knowing who they had truly worked for. For Yael, Ariel, and David, the route was more complex. They couldn't risk the airports or seaports. Their cover identities were now liabilities. Instead, they headed west, towards the Algerian border, a porous and dangerous frontier teeming with smugglers, bandits, and jihadist groups. David drove, using a third clean car he had stashed weeks earlier. Yael navigated, using a military-grade satellite mapping system that showed the locations of Tunisian and Algerian army patrols in near real time. Data being fed directly to her encrypted tablet by Tamar. Ariel sat in the back, silent and watchful, his hand never far from a concealed sidearm. They crossed the border at a remote, unguarded section of the desert at 3 a.m., guided by a paid Bedouin smuggler who asked no questions. Once in Algeria, they drove for another 6 grueling hours to a small private airfield where a chartered jet, officially filed to transport European oil executives, was waiting. They boarded without a word. As the wheels left Algerian soil, the 3 agents looked at each other for the first time since the operation began. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Back in Tel Aviv, in a sterile, windowless debriefing room deep within Mossad headquarters, Yael placed the black leather laptop bag on the polished table. The director of Mossad, a grim, hawk-nosed man named Yossi Cohen, was present, along with Tamar and a handful of senior intelligence officials. No one spoke of the assassination. No one mentioned the name Mohammed al-Zawahiri. Cohen simply gestured to the bag. A technician from the technical division, wearing white cotton gloves, stepped forward. He opened the bag and removed a high-end laptop and 2 encrypted external hard drives. He connected the laptop to a closed network, an air-gapped system completely isolated from the outside world. For an hour, he worked, methodically bypassing layers of sophisticated custom encryption. Tamar stood directly behind him, pointing out structural weaknesses in the code and suggesting algorithms to exploit them. Finally, they were in. And it was here, in the quiet, climate-controlled air of this underground room, that the final, stunning revelation of Operation Cerberus unfolded. The mission's true legacy was not the death of one man. It was the treasure trove of intelligence he carried. The laptop contained everything. There were the complete, final schematics for the Poseidon class of underwater drone, far more advanced than they had feared. It had a stealth coating made of a radar-absorbent polymer and a guidance system that used underwater terrain mapping cross-referenced with magnetic field data to navigate, making it virtually undetectable by sonar or GPS jamming. But there was more. Much more. The assassination, the intelligence heist, had been a resounding success. But as Tamar scrolled through the nested folders, a cold dread filled the room. A folder labeled Phase 2 contained plans for a new generation of drone. Not underwater, not aerial in the conventional sense. They were small, insect-like drones, designed for swarm attacks. The plans detailed a mother missile that would be launched from Gaza, fly over Israel, and then disperse a cloud of hundreds of these small, fast-moving drones. Each was equipped with a small, shaped charge explosive, capable of overwhelming a system like the Iron Dome, which was designed to intercept a small number of large, high-trajectory rockets, not a coordinated, intelligent cloud of tiny, fast-moving targets. The plans were theoretical but terrifyingly detailed. And worse, there was a log of encrypted communications. Zawari had not been working alone. He was collaborating with a team of engineers, not in Gaza or Lebanon. The IP addresses in the communication logs, once painstakingly traced, were found to originate from a server at Sharif University of Technology in Tehran. The engineer was dead, but his work had already been shared. His network was still active. The head of the snake had been cut off, but the body was already birthing new monsters. Yael looked at the screen, at the complex equations and terrifying designs. They had won a major battle. They had averted an imminent strategic threat from the sea. But in doing so, they had unveiled a future war, a new type of threat they were not yet prepared to fight. The blinking green dot on the map in Sfax was gone, but a dozen new ones had just appeared on the map of Iran. The operation was over. The war had just begun.